What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Josh Coker here, aka Josh's Prime. You know what it is. Coming back at you with another episode of Polymathics, the channel that helps you become a modern day Renaissance man or woman. And in this video, we're going to talk about the Minotaur archetype. But before we do, just want to let you know that this current episode is being brought to you
That's all, folks.
in part by the letter S for Story Ninjas, stories that pack a punch. You can find out more about us at story-ninjas.com. Now let's get into the episode. We're going to discuss for the next few videos the Minotaur archetype. And the reason why this is so important is because in modern fiction storytelling, this archetype is still found and you can see it in several representations. However, it is morphed, it has evolved. You even see it in video games. However, what I'm going to do is first we're going to talk today, in this video, we're going to talk about the history and background of the Minotaur. Then we'll talk about its physical attributes. Then we'll discuss the archetype functions and the psychological functions, representations. We'll discuss the stage that it most likely will be encountered in, and then we'll discuss fighting styles and a couple other, minor things. So in each one of those will be a video. That way this isn't super long. With that being said, let's get right into the history and background of the Minotaur. The Minotaur, I'm going to say this one time now, and then later on in the video of the archetype, we'll discuss in greater detail. But the Minotaur is a subclass archetype, a subclass of the dragon archetype, which is primarily a stage archetype found in most mythology. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the monomyth, or aka the hero's journey, aka the fool's journey, you can go ahead and look up. I have several videos on that. This archetype is a subclass of the dragon archetype, and there are some nuances and some differences, and that's one of the things that we're going to discuss later on when we talk about psychological significance and things of that nature. So now let's get into the history and background. Minotaurs, or some form of a Minotaur type of creature, has been in fiction for almost since time began. I mean, if you go back to, let's say, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and things like that, you will see half man, half beast with the beast head on the top type of creatures. And these were considered the gods. You have Thoth and Isis and all these other individuals. Now, I'm not saying that they were minotaurs per se, but they're the earliest, what I would call, representations of the Minotaur. And some even date back further. I just, off the top of my head, don't recall. The most famous story or myth of the Minotaur is the Minotaur and the labyrinth myth, which comes from ancient Greece. And this is basically the background, and this is going to help you understand what the archetypal Minotaur is and what it represents. So it's very important to understand the kind of backstory, or the origin story, if you will. The Minotaur, well, actually, we got to go back a little bit. Zeus, being the almighty god that reigns on Mount Olympus, was a bit of a pimp throughout, not even a pimp, like a player, throughout most of his time, most of his reign on Mount Olympus. And he would often change into animals to trick young, unsuspecting women into basically sleeping with him. And this is the case throughout several stories. This isn't an uncommon thing in Greek myth for Zeus to do. Sometimes he turns into a bird, and he'll fly in. Sometimes he'll turn into, in this case, a cow. And he came into a cow. Sorry, he turned into a field, he turned into a cow, and then he walked into a field where there was this beautiful maiden. I forget her name. I'll post it somewhere. And essentially, he makes love to her. And then she gets pregnant. She has 3 kids. And then Zeus grows tired of her, which is a normal Zeus thing, and he moves on. Well, here she is with her 3 kids and no husband. And then the king of, I think it was Thebes, comes, and I forget his name too, which I feel kind of bad about. I think it was, I don't want to guess. Herion? No, I'm not going to guess. So I'll put it somewhere like right here. He finds a liking to her, marries her. She becomes the queen of the land. Then what happens is he dies, and then eventually she dies. And then the question is, okay, well, who reigns? Because now there's 3 kids. He didn't have any sons, so basically the sons that he adopted through her, which were actually Zeus's children, are now the 3 sons that have the right to the throne. Well, Minos ends up basically claiming the throne. And according to one version of the myth, the way he did this was he created a large altar-like structure for Poseidon, and then he had a ceremony dedicated to Poseidon to earn Poseidon's favor. Poseidon, for those of you that don't know, was the god of the waters. And so then out of the water comes this bull, which was a sign from the gods, from Poseidon himself, that he did indeed give favor to Minos. And therefore, Minos was rightful king. Well, when this happened back in that time, what Minos was supposed to do was sacrifice that bull that had been offered up. But it was a gorgeous, apparently white bull, very, very and you got to remember back then, that was a big deal because farming was a major part of the economy back then. So, instead of sacrificing the bull that Poseidon brought forth for the sacrifice, Minos decided to keep it for himself, then sacrificed a different bull. Well, long story short, Poseidon gets wind of this, and he's like, dude, what the hell? What the fork, man? And so when he finds out about this, he casts this spell on the bull that makes Minos's wife super lustful for the bull. It's really weird. You just got to roll with it. It's a myth. And long story short, because I don't want to go into all the details, but the passion and desire of the spell eventually causes his wife to have sex with the bull, and then she gets pregnant. And then when she has the baby, it's a half baby, half human baby, half bull, where the head is basically the bull. A bull's head, or a cow's head. Well, Minos isn't too thrilled about this, and he realizes it's a punishment from the gods for what he did. But he doesn't want to kill the bull for fear of making the gods more angry, and he doesn't care about it. So he basically has this dude named Daedalus, who is the master builder in most of Greek mythology. He has him build a labyrinth, and this is where the famous labyrinth comes from. And the labyrinth was so twisted and complicated that even Daedalus himself had a hard time finding his way out. But by creating this labyrinth, Minos then puts the Minotaur baby in there, or child in there, and has him live out his days. And then like every 7 years. So again, I'm trying to tell you that this is the super abridged version. Then around the same time, Minos is warring with I think it was Athens, and once he defeats Athens, rather than totally obliterating them, he has them pay tribute with the sacrifice of 7 people every 7 years. Actually, it's 14 people. It's 7 guys, 7 girls, every 7 years. So, and then these people are basically sent into the labyrinth for the Minotaur to eat and kill. It's kind of weird. And we'll explain, I promise that in one of the later videos as we discuss this, I'll explain like what the psychological significance and symbolism is with all of that. So he does this for a couple years, or a couple rotations, and then eventually the prince of, I think it was Athens, the prince of Athens, Theseus, comes of age, I guess you could say, and he pulls a bit of a Hunger Games moment where they're doing this raffle to pick who the next 7 people are that are going to be shipped off to the Minotaur, and Theseus is like, I volunteer as tribute. And he goes with the plan to destroy the Minotaur and essentially free his kingdom from the boot of from the tyrannical boot of King Minos. So he goes over there, and long story short, I'm not gonna prolong it. He hooks up with one of Minos's daughters. She learns from Daedalus a method of not getting lost in the labyrinth, which is by using this string and attaching it to one part to his waist and one part to the front door of the labyrinth. Theseus does this. He finds the Minotaur. He sneaks in like a sword, finds the Minotaur, kills the Minotaur, then finds his way back, then escapes back to Athens. And that is essentially the history and background of the myth of the Minotaur. In the next video, we'll discuss physical attributes of the Minotaur and some basic elements, and then we'll go even further. We'll talk about the mythological elements, the psychological elements, the symbology, and things like that. So hopefully this was helpful, and if it was, give it a like. If you think somebody else might benefit from this, please share. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so that you can get all this information and more. And until next time, this has been Josh, aka Joshmus Prime, from Story Ninjas, Stories That Pack a Punch, ending this episode of Polymathics, the YouTube channel that helps you become a modern day Renaissance.